The mountains of eastern Afghanistan were dark shapes against a pale horizon, jagged teeth rising from the earth. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the kind of silence that made every bootstep sound like a warning. SEAL Team 2 moved with ritual precision across the rocks, their gear muffled, their breathing measured. It was just before dawn, the hour when shadows seemed endless and sound carried farther than it should. The mission was a routine surveillance of a Taliban compound nestled 2 kilometers down in the valley. Routine did not mean safe, and everyone knew it. Emily Johnson walked in the center of the formation, her pack heavy with communications gear. As an Air Force combat controller, she was not there to pull a trigger unless she had to. Her role was clear. She would establish contact with aircraft, direct, close air support if necessary, and keep the team connected to higher command. It was a role she had trained for through one of the most punishing pipelines in the military. The folded checklists in her pocket were creased from use. Each step memorized and repeated until it felt like instinct. When the team reached their overwatch position, they settled into a rocky ridge that offered a clear view of the compound below. The valley was still hidden in shadow, faint mist curling between broken walls and dry riverbeds. Emily moved quickly, planting her radio antenna at a precise angle against the rock, securing it with practiced hands. She tested frequencies, her voice steady in the headset, confirming clarity on each channel. The comms net linked ground to sky, the lifeline that would matter if the mission turned ugly. Around her, the SEALs unpacked optics, laid out ammunition, and found cover points. No one wasted words. Emily checked the targeting equipment strapped across her chest. Her hands moved in a calm rhythm, adjusting dials and toggles, syncing data that would provide exact coordinates if airstrikes were called in. The gear hummed faintly, a steady reminder of her defined value. She was the link to overwhelming firepower, the one who could summon aircraft to rain down precision destruction. That was what the doctrine expected. Her instructors had drilled it into her that her weapon was not her rifle, but her radio. Yet, as she settled into her position, her eyes shifted toward the M24 sniper rifle resting nearby. It belonged to Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's marksman, who had set it down while checking his optics. Emily's fingers brushed over the smooth metal of the barrel as she steadied the weapon against the rock. She told herself it was habit, a memory of the marksmanship training she had excelled at, but was never supposed to use. The rifle symbolized a capability that was not hers to claim. A hidden skill, waiting beneath layers of doctrine. The compound below was quiet. Its walls were thick with dust and moss, its vehicles parked under sagging tarps. No movement stirred, yet the silence carried weight, as if the valley itself was waiting. The air smelled of rock and cold dust, sharp in the lungs. The SEALs adjusted their scopes, scanning windows and rooftops, every motion precise, every sound intentional. Emily sat in the center of it all, her headset alive with the faint static of distant transmissions. She logged the initial coordinates in her notebook, her handwriting neat and compact. The folded checklists pressed against her thigh were a comfort, anchors of procedure in a world that rarely followed rules. Still, her gaze lingered on the rifle, just long enough to remind her that sometimes survival demanded more than assigned roles. The sky lightened by degrees, the first hints of color spreading across the ridgeline. Dawn would reveal them soon enough. For now, the stillness held, thick and heavy, a prelude to whatever the day would bring. The ridgeline remained quiet, but Emily Johnson had learned that quiet in Afghanistan rarely meant safe. She swept her optics across the valley floor, noting the faintest shimmer near a ridge to the east. It was not a campfire, not sunlight glancing off stone. It was too sharp, too quick. She logged the coordinates in her notebook and keyed her radio. Her voice was calm, professional, each syllable measured. She reported possible enemy movement converging on their position from multiple angles. Lieutenant David Patterson acknowledged the report without looking up from his mapboard. His tone was clipped. He told her to keep monitoring and stay on task. Extraction contingencies, he added, were his responsibility. Emily said nothing further, but her eyes returned to the shimmer. She adjusted her binoculars and caught it again, this time paired with a faint dust plume, a sniper glint. Another flash on the opposite ridge confirmed her suspicion. They were being bracketed. She toggled a separate frequency, checking with higher headquarters for close air support. The answer came back sterile. Attack aircraft were grounded by weather and threat conditions. The earliest window for support was 30 minutes away. 30 minutes meant too late. Static filled her headset as other nets lit up with chatter. Rodriguez muttered about muzzle flashes. Martinez, the point man, reported shapes moving through the scrub on the western slope. The overlapping fire zones were forming with frightening precision, tightening, like a noose. Emily listened, logging each report with quick notes, circling the triangulation pattern in her notebook. She understood what was happening. They were being pushed into a kill zone, a textbook ambush designed to exploit their reliance on air power. She keyed her mic again, voice calm but firmer. She recommended preparing for immediate ground maneuver because sniper positions already had fields of fire locked. Patterson's reply was quick, almost irritated. He reminded her that she was the combat controller, not the team's tactician. Her job was to establish extraction, coordinate aircraft, and keep the comms net stable. He told her again to stay on task. The radio headset pressed warm against her ear, carrying his dismissal as clearly as any order. Emily steadied her breathing. She had been through this before, the subtle reminder that she was not there to dictate ground tactics. Her role was vital but narrow, a link in the chain, never the one to shape the fight. Yet the chain was fraying. She could feel it. Her training whispered calculations at the edge of her mind. Angles, distances, time to contact. A memory flashed from her training days. One instructor, a Marine sniper brought in for a joint exercise, had noticed her natural steadiness. He had spent extra hours on the range with her, drilling wind calls, body control, and the psychology of the long shot. He told her once that precision was less about the weapon and more about the will to hold still when every nerve screamed to move. That training had never been on her syllabus. It had never been logged in her file. But it lived in her hands. She forced herself back to the present. Patterson was already on the net with higher command, requesting extraction helicopters. His voice was brisk, composed, the voice of an officer managing procedure. Around him, the SEALs shifted positions, scanning sectors, laying out ammunition. The professionalism was absolute, but Emily felt the gap widening between their preparations and the reality closing in. The enemy had the ridges. The kill zone was nearly sealed. She whispered into the headset again, low but steady, noting that multiple sniper nests were directing fire control. She recommended precision engagement to open a corridor. Patterson did not even look her way. His reply was the same. Stay on task. Johnson, maintain comms. The weight of the binoculars in her hands felt heavy. She lowered them, eyes narrowing at the valley below. Through the lenses she had seen the truth. They were surrounded, and time was collapsing. Yet the headset in her ear carried only silence between bursts of clipped procedure. Her sight had found the danger, but her voice went unheard. The motif was familiar. She had been trained to listen, to speak clearly, to trust the system. But the system did not trust her. And in the growing stillness before the next burst of gunfire, she understood again that institutions often dismissed individual initiative, even when survival depended on it. The first shot cracked from the east and echoed across the valley like a hammer striking stone. A puff of dust leapt from the ridge above their position, followed by a sharp burst of fire that chewed into the rocks shielding the team. Almost immediately, gunfire erupted from the opposite slope. The ridgeline came alive with muzzle flashes, each burst coordinated, each volley designed to pin the Americans where they crouched. Lieutenant David Patterson shouted contact reports, his voice sharp and controlled, while the SEALs snapped into firing positions. Rodriguez answered with a staccato burst from his carbine. Martinez called out arcs of movement, and the air thickened with dust as bullets struck stone. Emily Johnson pressed her headset closer, scanning overlapping nets. The comms filled with competing voices, requests for bearings, shouts of contact, clipped orders about ammunition count. In the middle of the chaos, Patterson's voice cut through with forced calm, urging them to hold positions and prepare for extraction. Emily logged every transmission, her pencil scratching against the margin of her map overlay. She marked fire points in quick slashes, connecting lines that showed the shape of the ambush. It was not scattered insurgent fire. This was disciplined, deliberate. Fields of fire overlapped perfectly, denying every obvious movement corridor. Mortar rounds thumped from the valley rim, their impacts close enough to rattle teeth. Dust clouds rolled across their perch, turning the air into choking haze. One cry of pain snapped through the channel as a SEAL went down, hit in the leg by a grazing round. Emily heard the urgency rise, men calling for a corpsman, others laying down suppressive bursts. Patterson's orders tightened. He was already calling higher command, requesting immediate extraction. The answer came back with dead finality. 30 minutes minimum. Emily steadied her breathing and raised her optics. Through the dust and haze, she found them the faint glint of glass in a cave opening to the northeast, the flicker of shadow across a rock shelf to the south, and the subtle muzzle flash from a camouflage nest to the west. 3 sniper teams, perfectly placed, each one controlling a withdrawal route. Together they locked the Americans inside an invisible cage. Her headset buzzed with broken static as comms degraded, clipped words cutting in and out. She caught fragments. Wounded. Fire concentrated east. Need movement. Patterson's voice responded with cold control, declaring they would hold until extraction arrived. But Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the map overlay pinned against her knee. She circled the sniper positions, drawing connecting arcs. The pattern was unmistakable. The enemy had studied them, predicted their reliance on air support, and created a trap designed to collapse before help could arrive. Dust swirled again as another mortar struck nearby, showering rock fragments across her equipment. She shielded her radio with her arm, feeling grit grind into her sleeve. The dust cloud hung heavy in the air, a physical reminder of how narrow their margin had become. Emily pressed her headset, but the broken signal was little more than noise. Procedure was failing. The battlefield was closing like a trap. She exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing on her notes. Tactical brilliance came not from following orders but from seeing what others missed. 3 sniper nests, 3 kill zones. Unless those positions were neutralized, extraction would be suicide. Emily Johnson shifted her weight against the rock, her headset alive with static. Through the dust, she had already traced the pattern. 3 sniper nests, 3 fields of fire, 3 exits sealed. She keyed her mic and spoke low but firm, reporting the concealed positions. Her tone carried the precision of coordinates, not guesses. Lieutenant David Patterson listened in silence, then cut her off. His reply came clipped. She was to stay on comms and focus on extraction. Her eyes stayed locked on the valley. She pressed again, voice calm but edged with urgency. Unless those sniper nests were taken out, extraction would be impossible. Any movement toward a landing zone would draw direct fire. Patterson's tone hardened. She was not the marksman. Her role was to keep the net alive. His words carried the weight of doctrine, of rigid trust in roles. Emily let the silence stretch. Dust blew against her visor, settling on her gear. Then she answered with deliberate clarity. Combat controller training included precision shooting, ranges between 500 and 800 meters, partial concealment, timed exposures. She outlined them one by one, naming angles and fire windows with clinical exactness. The math was cold, undeniable. Patterson's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He also knew that letting her try risked everything. For a moment he weighed the choice, glancing at the wounded seal beside him, at the valley choked with muzzle flashes. Survival depended on neutralizing those nests. He exhaled once, the decision heavy. His voice dropped low. Make it count. Johnson. We will not get a second chance. Emily removed her headset and set it beside the radio, a symbolic shift from her defined role. She reached for the M24 sniper rifle resting near Rodriguez. He gave a quick nod, sliding it toward her without a word. She laid prone, steadying the stock against her shoulder. Every motion deliberate. She unfolded the chart from her vest, checked her marks, then tucked it back into place. Her hands moved with quiet assurance. She loaded a round, cycled the bolt, and adjusted the scope. She tested wind with the smallest flick of dust, calculated drop and drift, and aligned the crosshairs. Her breathing slowed into discipline. Each inhale measured. Each exhale stretched, thin. The world around her narrowed to the view through glass, a single line of sight that mattered more than doctrine or hesitation. There was no bravado, no dramatics, just cold professionalism under pressure. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the voice on the radio. She was the shooter holding the future of the team in her hands. Emily Johnson settled into the rock ledge, the M24 steady against her shoulder. Dust drifted around her, muted by the ringing quiet that came whenever she shut everything else out. The firefight still raged. Patterson was shouting orders. Rifles cracked in short bursts. Mortar rounds thudded into the ridgeline, but all of it felt distant. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs and the three positions that sealed their fate. The first target revealed itself in a shallow cave cut into the northeast ridge. At 650 meters, the distance was challenging but within reach. She adjusted for wind, noting the flags of dust that rose and fell in uneven rhythm. She counted the sniper's firing cycle, waiting for the brief moment when he leaned out from cover to adjust his aim. Emily breathed in once, let the air slip out slowly, and pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, recoil pushing back into her shoulder, and the round found its mark. The enemy sniper folded instantly, the echo of his collapse swallowed by the mountains. For a moment there was silence. Then Rodriguez whispered in disbelief. The SEALs glanced toward her, eyes wide. Patterson gave no praise, only barked for them to hold the line. But the shock was clear. Emily ignored their looks. She was already shifting to the second position. The southern ridge sniper was dug in behind a natural rock shelf. At 720 meters, the shot demanded precision far beyond the first. He had already wounded one of the SEALs. The man's leg bound hastily while blood seeped through. Emily adjusted, elevation, compensated for the angle, and tracked the pattern. She knew snipers rarely lingered in one spot after firing. He would shift, searching for a new line. She tightened her grip, watching the shadow. When the figure leaned into the narrow gap to realign his shot, Emily squeezed. The crack was sharper this time, her heartbeat louder in her ears. The round punched through the exposed target, dropping him instantly. Relief moved through the team like a current. The pressure on the southern flank eased. Patterson glanced her way, his face unreadable, then turned back to the valley. This was no longer luck. They began to believe. The third target was different. 800 meters to the west. The sniper's camouflage was nearly perfect. Emily had only glimpsed him through fleeting muzzle flashes, faint arcs of light in the haze. The M24 was reaching its limit, the environment full of cross winds, shifting between ridgelines. Her chart offered no certainty. She would have to trust the rhythm, not the sight. She steadied her breathing, pressing her cheek to the stock, every muscle locked into stillness. She studied the firing cycle again, noting the seconds between flashes. It was a pattern, deliberate, almost taunting. She adjusted her aim a hair above the shadow she believed was his nest, compensating for drift. The silence stretched. Then the flash came, brief and sharp. Emily fired. The shot carried across the valley, the bullet cutting through shifting air. For a heartbeat, she thought she had missed. Then the western ridge went still. The muzzle flashes ceased. The nest that had coordinated the entire ambush had gone dark. The effect was immediate. Enemy fire across the valley faltered, bursts becoming scattered and unfocused. Without their snipers, the fighters lost their cohesion. Rodriguez muttered a quiet curse of awe. Even Patterson paused, his voice low as he acknowledged the result. 3 shots, 3 kills, and the trap was broken. Emily lowered the rifle and slipped her headset back into place. Dust still hung in the air, but the noose had loosened. The crosshairs had cut through chaos, one breath at a time. Survival had not come from formal roles or doctrine, but from the courage to act when no one else could. The valley shifted almost instantly once the western ridge fell silent. The coordinated bursts that had pinned SEAL Team 2 dissolved into scattered fire, undisciplined and panicked. Fighters who had moved with precision just minutes earlier now shouted over one another, their weapons firing, without rhythm. The mortar team went quiet, no longer able to call corrections without the snipers feeding them range. For the first time since the first crack of gunfire, the Americans had room to breathe. Lieutenant David Patterson did not hesitate. He directed the team to push out of the shallow depression where they had been trapped. Rodriguez and Martinez laid suppressive fire while the others shifted downslope toward the compound. Dust hung thick, but the arcs of fire no longer overlapped. Emily Johnson followed, her headset pressed back into place, her voice calm as she confirmed positions with higher command. The M24 rested beside her on the rocks, abandoned for now, but its weight lingered in the eyes of every man who had seen what she had done. The approach to the compound was measured, every step a test of whether the enemy still held the ground, but resistance collapsed with each move forward. Fighters broke contact, some scattering down narrow gullies, others firing erratic bursts before retreating. The snipers had not only provided deadly fire, they had been the backbone of coordination. With them gone, the field unraveled. Inside the compound, the team moved fast, clearing low, mud-walled rooms and scanning courtyards. Emily kept her comms net alive, relaying updated grids, marking cleared sectors, and logging observations. She returned fully to the role she had trained for. Her voice steady, clipped, professional. Yet every so often her eyes flicked back to the rifle still resting on its bipod against the stone. No one questioned it now. No one told her to stay on task. They found documents in one of the inner room's maps annotated with routes, names tied to operations, records of supply caches hidden in the valleys. Patterson secured the material in his pack, understanding that the intelligence would ripple far beyond this one mission. The firefight had been brutal, but the objective was intact. As they regrouped for extraction, Patterson finally turned to Emily. His expression was controlled, but his words carried weight. He told her that her shooting had turned the mission around, that her precision had given them back the initiative when the field had been lost. It was not ceremony. It was respect spoken in the way operators valued most, plain acknowledgement without flourish. Emily nodded once and adjusted her headset again. Her fingers moved across the dials, calling in their extraction bird. The M24 remained where she had left it, quiet proof of what she had done. Around her, the SEALs checked magazines, repacked gear, and prepared to move. Relief was present, but contained, professionalism asserting itself again as order returned after chaos. The battle was not over. Afghanistan never gave clean endings, but they had survived the trap, completed the mission, and gathered intelligence that would matter. Authority on that ridge had shifted, not by rank, but by the 3 shots Emily had chosen to take when no one else could. The forward operating base was quiet in the days after the mission. Dust still clung to the vehicles that rolled through the gate, and the air carried the sharp tang of burned fuel. Debriefs were held in a narrow plywood room where a projector flickered against the wall. Emily Johnson sat at the edge of the table while analysts replayed fragments of helmet camera footage. They slowed the frames where her shots echoed through the valley, highlighting impact points with laser pointers. The conclusion came, without argument. Each round had struck true at distances that matched the expectations for trained military snipers. Patterson gave his report in calm, clipped language. He spoke of coordination, of communications maintained under fire, of the steady professionalism expected of a combat controller. Then, without embellishment, he noted the 3 precision shots. His phrasing was deliberate. They had shifted the engagement, allowing the team to regain initiative. He did not linger on it. But when he returned to his seat, the silence in the room carried respect. The SEALs who had once laughed at her caution now looked at her differently. Rodriguez gave her a nod as he passed, a quiet acknowledgement that needed no words. Martinez offered her a ration bar during a break, sliding it across the table without a joke attached. Even the corpsman, who had wrapped the wounded man's leg, spoke softly when he told her that her timing had saved more lives than anyone would admit. 2 days later, the orders arrived in a plain folder delivered by courier. Inside was the directive assigning Emily to advanced sniper training. It did not erase her role as a combat controller. Instead, it formalized what had already been proven. She would become dual qualified, trusted both as the voice linking ground to sky and as the marksman capable of shaping the battlefield when air support was too far away. The paper was heavy in her hands, the black ink stark against the white page. It was not a medal. It was recognition written in orders. That night she unfolded her worn checklist and smoothed its creases across her desk. The ink had faded in places where her fingers had traced the same lines over and over. She set the new orders beside it, the 2 papers lying together. Procedure and instinct. Discipline and improvisation. On the shelf rested the M24 cleaned and returned to the rack. But to her it no longer belonged solely to another role. It was part of her story now, as much a tool of survival as the radio headset. In the weeks that followed, word of the mission spread quietly through training circles. Instructors spoke of the case without naming her, teaching that capability mattered more than job description. The lesson became a reminder that courage sometimes meant stepping beyond the boundaries drawn on paper. Emily Johnson had not been sent out as a sniper. She had been sent to coordinate air, but 3 shots fired in silence had written a different kind of record, one that carried no ceremony, yet endured far longer.